You've been working for 30 years. You showed up, paid, remained loyal, and everyone you trusted said the same thing to you. When you retired, there was a check waiting for you every month for the rest of your life. Now imagine you are 67, your job is over, and someone tells you that a check is different from a promise. This is not a thought experiment. That happened to thousands of truck drivers and workers as the Central State Pension Fund began running out of roads. This is the largest municipal bankruptcy in American history, tearing up the retirement accounts of Detroit employees. Now, the same thing is happening in slow motion to millions of Americans who don't know the clock is already running. Everyone leads by a big number. $4 trillion in state and local government pension funds. Sounds like a fortress. That sounds untouchable. But sitting next to that number is less reassuring. These funds actually owe far more, and the gap between what they own and what they promise is where retirees are swallowed up. Today, we are opening one of America's most mysterious financial stories. Whether you have a pension or not, whether your taxes are funding someone else's pension, or whether you just want to know if there is anything left for you. When you stop working, the story directly touches you. Section 1. Promise. How pensions were born. To get to where you are now, you first have to understand what pensions are designed to be and what they will look like in practice. The idea is simple. Part of your salary will not be cash today. It will be deferred, held in trust, and repaid as a fixed monthly income after you retire, as long as you live. This arrangement is called a defined benefit plan because benefits are pre-locked in, and workers know exactly what will happen next. As early as 1875, American Express introduced a model considered the first private nutrition company in the United States, which spread across industries in the next century until it became a pillar of American retirement. Factory workers, railroad workers, teachers, firefighters, police. You see the same deals everywhere. Work hard, stay loyal, and we'll take care of you. For a while, the system stayed the same. After World War II, the United States was profitable, and its tax base was expanding, a figure that seemed manageable on paper. But the seed of the problem lies in the first generation of pension commitments, made today and paid over the next few decades. And the gap between promises and payments is where all the trouble ends. Politicians and executives quickly learned that what they found was the worst political convenience. Promise generous retirement benefits today and leave before the bills arrive. Make promises, collect votes, ensure labor peace, and let the next agent figure out how to actually fund it. As a result, pledges have grown, and donations, indeed annual allocations, have not kept pace. On the 2nd of September, 1974, the Employee Retirement Income Security Act, ERISA, was introduced, which represents a real attempt to solve the problem of private sector pensions. ERISA has set minimum funding standards, demanded transparency, and created a pension benefit guarantee company to act as a backstop for the federal government if private plans fail. Private sector workers get some protection. Imperfect, but real. It is an asterisk that changes everything. Public sector pensions, covering government employees, operate entirely outside ERISA. They are not backed by the PBGC. State and local pension systems operate under their own rules, their own accounting standards, and their own political pressures. An arrangement that, as the rest of this article shows, has caused a slow disaster. Section 2. Transformation. The United States abandons pensions. Back in the early 1980s, about 60% of private sector workers held a traditional, fixed benefit pension, a real pension, a monthly check. Now that number has plummeted to about 15%. And the story of how that happened has reshaped everything we think we know about American retirement. Two words explain most of this. Section 401k. In 1978, Congress added this provision to the tax code, which was almost ignored, mainly to help executives delay payments. No one who drafted the bill expected it to become the entire American retirement system. Then in 1980, Ted Benna, a welfare consultant, found a way to interpret 401k as the basis for employer-funded savings plans and provide corresponding contributions. And he established the company's first savings plan. Mr. Benner later described it as one of his biggest regrets, not because the idea itself was flawed, but because of what American companies had turned it into. Next is one of the largest cost transfers in corporate financing history. No matter what the market does or employees contribute, fixed income pensions will cost employers, meaning companies will take real financial risks for decades to come. 401k completely eliminates this exposure, pushing investment risk, life risk, and all other forms of retirement uncertainty directly to workers. If the market collapses a year before you retire, it is not the company's problem anymore, it is yours. Over the next 40 years, one company after another froze pension plans, banned new employees, and distributed 401k brochures to employees. Airlines did it, automakers did it, and the entire private sector, industry by industry, slowly moved away from fixed income commitments until almost nothing remained. The status quo is maintained by public sector pensions. Government employees, teachers, firefighters, police officers, state and municipal workers from all walks of life have largely retained their defined benefit plans, which in many states are written directly into the state constitution as contractual obligations protected by law. For public officials, it sounds like a safety precaution in theory, but these commitments require consistent funding, strict investment, management, and honest assumptions about actual market returns. And in too many places, all three are ignored, manipulated, or mismanaged, which is what makes the $4.4 trillion report troubling. Part 3. The $4.4 trillion figure. Why mislead you? There is now about $4 TN in state and local government pension funds. According to Federal Reserve liquidity data, money exists. Invest in stocks, bonds, real estate, private equity. Real estate with real value. But $4.4 trillion. That is a question everyone should ask, because the health of pension funds doesn't just depend on the number of assets. It depends on the relationship between these assets and liabilities, the total amount the fund promises to pay. Each current and future retiree, Pew Charitable Trusts, has released its most detailed annual analysis of us national pension funds, using official accounting methods to estimate a total shortfall of about $1.4 TN, about $5.8 trillion in debt, backed by $4.4 trillion in assets, produces an average financing ratio of about 7 to 4%, promised 74 cents per dollar. That sounds bad enough. It is getting worse. The $1.4 trillion gap is calculated using accounting standards unique to public pensions, which most financial economists believe are on shaky footing. The problem boils down to a single technical option called the discount rate, and understanding it changes the whole picture. When a pension fund calculates debt in today's dollars, the present value of all future monthly payments, It must choose an interest rate that discounts future cash flows. Back to the present. As interest rates rise, debt shrinks. As interest rates fall, they expand. Public pension funds can use the expected rate of return as the discount rate, most of which assume an annual rate of return of 7–7.5%, which is an aggressive number by any reasonable standard. Joshua Raw, an economist at Stanford University, has been documenting the precise reasons for the misleading results of this approach for years. Private sector pensions regulated under ERISA must use interest rates linked to high-grade corporate bonds, which are much lower, applying similar logic to public pensions. Using conservative, risk-adjusted interest rates of 4 to 5%, unfunded liabilities would not reach $1.4 trillion. Based on the assumptions used, the figure is about $4 trillion to $8 trillion. Defenders of the current approach, including the National Association of State Retirement Administrators, argue that pension funds are long-term institutions that can withstand market cycles without a fixed liquidation date, giving them reasonable reasons to use expected returns as discount rates. The debate between these camps is real, with serious economists on both sides. But both sides must accept that in a world full of geopolitical uncertainty and demographic headwinds, these 7% yield assumptions must actually be realized in real markets and real volatility, no matter how you structure accounting. Optimistic spreadsheet forecasts, betting on retirement protection for tens of millions of people, are a fragile foundation. Section 4. Countries in crisis. It is not an abstraction playing out somewhere in the national economy. It is happening in a particular state, in a particular city, affecting a particular group of people who build their lives around a particular commitment. Some of these situations passed the warning stage a few years ago. Illinois is the most striking case study in the United States, with total unfunded liabilities estimated at more than $200 billion in the 5 major pension systems, hovering between 40% and 45%. $1.40. The state currently devotes only 25 to 30% of its total income to pension contributions, meaning that every dollar of debt chased means $1 from schools, roads, and public safety, weakening the tax base that should fund pensions. There is no clean outlet for this feedback loop. The only trouble for Illinois is that the state constitution contains an explicit provision, Section 13, Paragraph 5, declaring that public pension membership represents an enforceable contractual relationship in which benefits cannot be reduced or impaired. The Illinois Supreme Court has rejected every serious attempt at reform on constitutional grounds, meaning the state is effectively unable to reduce its debt. The only option is financing, and that is exactly what bipartisan governments in Illinois have been failing to do. New Jersey has experienced a similar pattern for decades, with fund ratios fluctuating between 30% and 50% by plan and year. And governors and lawmakers have a long-standing bipartisan tradition of skipping or underpaying pension contributions to support other priorities. Kentucky deserves special attention because its Kentucky Employee Retirement System's non-hazardous plan has a financial support rate of less than 20%, one of the worst personal financial support rates in any public pension plan in the United States. The promised support to retired civil servants is less than 20 cents per dollar. Wisconsin and South Dakota, on the other side, are close to or fully financed. Disciplined contribution policies, conservative benefit structures, and a political culture that views pension obligations as truly binding, rather than budget quotas that need to be rated, in times of economic stress, have proved the system's effectiveness. They are exceptions, not rules. Puerto Rico has its own category. By 2017, when the region restructured its debt under PROMESA, its government employee pension system was about 1% funded. These assets have largely disappeared, consumed by decades of neglect, and pensions have become purely pay-as-you-go, completely dependent on annual budget allocations. 1% is the end of the road, and Puerto Rico is the clearest example of where systemic tax avoidance is headed. Part 5. Detroit, the United States is sounding the alarm. The 18th of July, 2013, Detroit filed for Chapter 9 bankruptcy, $18 billion to $20 billion in debt. It was then the largest municipal bankruptcy in American history. At the heart of the document is pension obligations. What really shocked Detroit was not the scale of the crash, but its drama. It set a legal precedent. The Michigan Constitution, like many other state constitutions, appears to protect public pension benefits, and workers are explicitly and repeatedly told that their pensions are guaranteed. Monthly checks are the law, not just a promise. Federal bankruptcy laws operate at a different level than state constitutional protections, and pension cuts were on the table when Kevin Orr, the emergency manager, began dealing with Detroit's finances. In bankruptcy courts, ordinary urban retirees cannot see basic benefits and lose the cost of living adjustment. Police officers and fire retirees have been better treated, but they have taken a hit. The court's record is grim. Even constitutionally protected public pensions can be cut when the underlying entity is completely out of control, because federal bankruptcy laws can override the language of state constitutions in practice. Defenders of the broader system rightly point to Detroit as an extreme confluence of factors: decades of population loss, industrial collapse, and severe mismanagement that most municipalities will never face. That is fair. Still important. After Detroit, there is no national reckoning. No wave of reform has swept through states with similar structural problems. The conditions that led to the Detroit crisis: political commitments without sufficient funds, delayed donations, and unrealistic assumptions about returns have not disappeared. In many places, the situation has quietly worsened as the news cycle has advanced. Section 6. Multiemployer time bombs. Much of the story focuses on public pensions, but the question of whether the parallel crisis in the private sector has really been resolved or just postponed deserves a direct answer. Multi-employer pension plans cover about 10 million to 12 million workers and retirees in industries like trucking, construction, entertainment, and retail, arrangements in which companies contribute to single-share plans, usually organized through unions. The Central State Pension Fund, which covers truck drivers and workers concentrated in the trucking industry, is the clearest example of how these arrangements could unravel. At its peak, hundreds of thousands of participants in the Central States looked stable enough. Then decades of industry consolidation, deregulation, and the bankruptcy of large trucking companies drained the fund's employers until math became impossible. Too many retirees received benefits, and too few companies paid. By the mid-2010s, the Central States are expected to be completely bankrupt by about 2025 without large-scale intervention, meaning hundreds of thousands of people will face 60% or more benefit cuts, and they will not have real 401 401k savings to withstand the impact. The knock-on effect will not be limited to the central states, as a collapse on this scale will trigger large-scale claims against the PBGC Multiemployer insurance plan, which itself is expected to go bankrupt in the early 2030s. The safety net also has a hole just the right size to pass through. Under the Multiemployer Pension Reform Act of 2014, central states applied for benefit cuts, marking the first time in American history that a law would allow cuts in benefits for existing retirees, not just future accruals. The Treasury Department rejected the application in 2016, but rejecting it did not address the underlying problem. It simply left it there and made it bigger. In March 2021, the United States introduced the American Rescue Plan Act and a $96 billion special financial assistance plan to cope with the failed multi-employer plan, the largest pension rescue plan in American history. The central states alone received about $35 billion, and hundreds of thousands of retirees focused on catastrophic cuts were given suspended sentences. But note what the suspension requires: taxpayer-funded government assistance. The structural problems that led to the failure of these projects: the industrial recession, the shrinking donor base, the aging beneficiary population have not changed. The rescue bought time. Whether it bought a permanent solution is entirely another question, and no one in Washington has given a satisfactory answer. Part 7. Risk Spiral. What do pension funds do in chasing returns? One dynamic in the story is that even among those who pay close attention to pension finance, there is not enough attention to what underfunded pension funds do when they need more money. On the surface, this logic seems reasonable. If the fund is short, it will produce a higher return on investment to bridge the gap. The problem is that pursuing higher returns requires more investment risk, and applying more investment risk to an already underfunded plan is essentially betting on retirement protection with others. Once it works, the gap closes. Without it, and the market has no obligation to process anyone's spreadsheets, underfunding can worsen dramatically. This is where many public pension funds have gone in the past 2 decades. In the field of public pension, the allocation of alternative investment, such as private equity, hedge funds, real estate, and infrastructure, has increased significantly, and some large plans now invest 30%, 40%, or even 50% of their portfolios in illiquid, alternative investment. CalPERS, the California Civil Service Retirement System, the nation's largest public pension fund, with assets of more than $400 billion, has been at the center of these debates for years. CalPERS disclosed a notable disclosure that prompted serious scrutiny. The disclosure said it had paid about $3.4 billion in performance fees to private equity managers over about 25 years, a performance advantage that was not significant at best, compared with direct open market investments. When analysts examined net returns after deducting those fees, the fund absorbed enormous complexity, locked its capital in an illiquid structure, paid Wall Street handsomely, and ended up with a simple index fund strategy that might match. Pension debt bonds have their own problems. The government borrows money by issuing bonds and deposits the proceeds directly into pension funds, where investment returns are expected to exceed debt interest rates. On a good spreadsheet with favorable assumptions, it looks smart. Illinois, New Jersey, and several cities have taken this approach. But when the market underperforms, the result is a new debt obligation on top of an existing pension shortage, doubling your lost position. Section 8. Social Security dimensions. Social Security is mostly seen as a separate conversation, with the pension crisis, a separation that is wrong. Because for tens of millions of Americans, the two stories are the same story from different angles. Trustees of the Social Security Bureau have been predicting that without legislative action, the plan's trust will run out around 2033 to 2035, a year that will vary slightly with each annual report. Once the trust runs out, benefits must be reduced to about 75 to 80 cents per dollar, based only on the upcoming payroll tax. Most analysts believe Congress will act by that date to pass some combination of entitlement adjustments, changes in retirement, age and income increases. Social Security has enough political clout. That total inaction seems unlikely. But this is directly related to the pension story, because for a large number of American retirees, Social Security is not a supplement to pensions or 401k pensions. That is the whole plan. Surveys consistently show that a significant number of American retirees depend on Social Security for more than half their income, and many depend on Social Security for 80 or 90% of their income. The plan, designed by the Social Security Administration, aims to replace about 40% of the pre-retirement income of ordinary earners, when private pensions have largely disappeared and 401k savings have proved inadequate. And for most families, too, 40% of the substitutes carry far more weight than they could bear. When they were built, pension crisis and Social Security challenge are two sides of the same hollowing out commitment. The retirement security system sold to the American middle class in the second half of the 20th century was suddenly eroded in many directions, with minimal error, by workers now approaching retirement. Part 9. What really works? The story doesn't have to end in collapse, as there is evidence in states where pensions are managed correctly, where the same promises are made, without the same structural failures. Wisconsin's pension system is ranked year after year as one of the richest in the United States, and the factors behind this historical record are not complex. Consistent contributions by employers and employees, conservative return assumptions that do not require the market to perform at the high end of the historical range, and a welfare structure that includes moderate flexibility to automatically adjust when the fund does not perform well, rather than allowing unfunded liabilities to compound indefinitely. Risk is distributed between funds and beneficiaries in a structured and predictable manner, rather than sitting entirely on taxpayers' balance sheets. South Dakota tells a similar story. Conservative management, disciplined funding, and a political culture that treats pension obligations as binding rather than pension contributions, as savings accounts are rated when budgets tighten. Both states have proved that this model works, but they are not the norm. On the reform front, several states have incorporated new hires into mixed plans that combine modest fixed income components with defined contribution elements. Tennessee, Michigan, and other states have restructured new hires. These models are not perfect outcomes for workers because they shift greater retirement risks to individuals than traditional pensions, but their long-term cost profile is more sustainable than plans that require an annual return of 7.5% and perfect political execution in every economic cycle. The lesson that runs through every success story boils down to one straightforward thing: financing your commitments with honest assumptions. Every deferred pension contribution, every inflated income assumption, every pension obligation bond issued to fill the funding gap, Every decision is a retirement guarantee loan from real workers and real taxpayers. And the bill eventually arrives. It never appeared. Closing. That is where it landed. The $4.4 trillion headline is real money. Assets exist and are substantial, but these assets go hand in hand with debt. That could take $6 trillion, $7 trillion or more to fully realize, depending on the integrity of accounting and whether the return assumption holds in the real market. Tens of millions of Americans choose public service jobs, in part because of pension commitments. What happened to teachers, firefighters, police officers, all kinds of state workers who received this benefit through decades of work is not abstract. This is the most specific financial reality they face. And for anyone worried about not holding a pension, living in the 401k world, navigating turbulent markets, and hoping to save enough money, you are also a stakeholder in the story, because underfunded public pensions do not stay neatly in pension funds. They end up with higher taxes, fewer public services, and less investment in the communities where everyone lives. The sheer complexity of the issue creates a comfortable numbness. The numbers are too big, the timeline feels distant, and the politicians who initially promised won applause decades ago and then moved on. But math has no interest in political timelines. For the millions of people who depend on these promises to retire, the structural gap is real, the clock is ticking, and the distance between promise and reality is greater than most people are told. If this video gives you a clearer picture of the reality of retirement in the United States, share it with retirees, or anyone trying to figure out retirement plans for the next 20 years. Click the like button. It really helps make it visible to those in need. If you want to continue delving deeper into retirement protection, income strategies, and the most important financial issues of the next decade, subscribe, because there is so much more to cover. See you next time.